Our key thought today: 18 ways to get to your transmitter with audio. I started thinking about this a couple of years ago when I visited WLS in Chicago, and Warren Scholes showed me his plant. And there were about 6 or 7 different ways that his audio from his studio was right there, ready immediately. And of course, he didn't have the shortest one, and that's, if your studio and your transmitter are right next to each other, you might just be 2 feet of cable. But you want to have, was it, Chris, you call it unbreakable connectivity. You don't want to run dead air. You don't want to have your listeners wondering, well, when will they be back? And so there are a lot of problems that could cause. Chris Crump is with us today, and part of the discussion will be using the best STL for your needs and how to keep up, how to make sure you don't lose the opportunity to let your listeners know what's going on. In addition to the hardwire, gold-plated hardwire, right? For those of you that want the best audio reception, we could have analog phone loops. We could have problems, though, of course, that those loops could be in bad shape with missing carbons. Maybe some local druggie has decided that he wants the copper. Then there's the 950 STLs, which work, reasonably well if you have good line of sight. Of course, in many cities, those are crowded, and there are co-channel creeps. I remember one day we had a station where they actually did have a power failure, and all of a sudden, on the air was not the station, but a Mexican station. Seems that a co-channel STL, well, he installed it on the same polarization, which he didn't have a license for, but that's what he did. I've seen cases where a particular STL from one station pointed at their transmitter and went straight through onto another transmitter site. You would think that doesn't happen, but it does. And now there is a issue of coordination that could cost you $1,000 or something like that. We used a T1 megahertz and a half, being phased out if you can still find one. Same thing with ISDN. So you got the 2 gigahertz and the 5 gigahertz and the 10 gigahertz, licensed or unlicensed. Many of you have installed the Ubiquity transmitter packages, which are very cost effective, and they work. Of course, if you are out in the middle of nowhere, you're not going to get much that's in the way. Of course, in your city, again, you could have some real interference. How about the 150 RPU? Not designed for STL use, but you could get the audio there in an emergency. Same with your 450 RPU. Spread spectrum. Cellular data. A lot of people use a system where you have a cell phone hooked into your arrangement. UMA does it for one. They have a Telos 4 with a it's an LTE 4G4. How about satellite reception? You can get satellite audio to your transmitter. It's expensive, and there is the problem of bogging it down, some throttling. How about using a stream on the internet? Public internet's out there. That's a solution some use. Of course, some stations think they don't have to pay for it, so they buy the cheapest box. And then they wonder why the audio is delayed for a long period of time, or it sounds terrible. Some cheap codecs, you might say. You could get a box that uses 2 different independent internet streams. Or you could just use your stream as a backup. And then, of course, there is the dark fiber that you might find in an area. Lots of ideas. If you have another one that I've missed, just bring it up. But I'd like to bring Chris in at this point because I've used at several stations the Comrex Bricklink. I have found it to be a very stable product. And I recently found out something that maybe some of you don't know. It includes 8 sets of contact closures. Because a lot of people used to say, well, that's the one thing I don't like about my transmitter remote control, because I can't set something else. I can't turn a light on, or I can't reset the power on the computer or something like that. And the Comrex will do that. I haven't done it yet. I just found out, but it's there. So, Chris, talk to us about some of these issues here, about why this need for unbreakable connectivity is more important than ever. I mentioned the internet, and you mentioned to me a lot of DDoS attacks are going on right now. And that could.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. And, going back to the early 2000s when I just started working with Comrex, and the concept of getting away from ISDN and using the public internet as a transport for an STL, or a real-time live interactive two-way for a live remote. I personally didn't see that happening because my experience with the internet back then was Windows Media Encoder, and trying to listen to anything on a Windows Media Encoder or a decoder at the time was a lot of stops and starts, and the internet wasn't that great. But the technology that Comrex developed kind of was in keeping with what they had been doing since 1961, and that was leveraging the most widely deployed data infrastructure available, whether it was equalized phone lines or POTS lines or ISDN lines or licensed frequencies to deliver broadcast quality audio for various applications for broadcasters. And I remember when we first introduced our IP codecs back in 2005, 2006, everyone was saying it's not ready for prime time. It's not ready for prime time. But I would have to argue that at this point, that ship sailed a long time ago. We're way past prime time, and it's in full-time use in a lot of Class B, Class C FM, a lot of AMs as primary, as backup, as primary and backup. And a lot of that is due to the fact that we've developed a lot of technology to make even marginal networks usable. And when I say marginal networks, networks that are compromised by things like too much junk mail, too much bandwidth demand, too many denial of service attacks, and so forth. So as a manufacturer, our development team is constantly having to come up with ways to combat the perils of the public internet, whether they're caused by overuse or with malicious intent. So there's a lot of little things that we can talk about that make that work. But to be fair, I mean, to my competitors, all of us IP codec manufacturers have some kind of secret sauce to deal with the difficulties of the public internet, whether it's, dual streams or stream splicing or whatever you want to call it. Just some kind of heavy lifting mechanism to make sure that the packets are going to get through. Back in the days of circuit switch data networks, when we had copper lines end to end that were switched on permanently for us for ISDN, it was a pretty good deal, and the audio quality was pretty good, availability was pretty good, and the pricing was pretty good. But obviously, as that technology became antiquated and you could no longer get parts for 5 ESS switches or NT1 terminal stuff within the phone company, within the central office, they needed to basically switch over to packet switch data networks and so forth. But even that was no guarantee that data was going to get through. So that's one of the reasons we developed a number of different techniques within our device to make it work. And the first one being the ability to deal with congestion on the network, and a congestion avoidance technique where you could sense that there was congestion on the network, and then you could create a dynamic buffer to accommodate for those late arriving packets. And then something that we referred to as UDP reliability, which seems like an oxymoron because UDP isn't designed to be reliable. It's designed to send a lot of packets and hope that they get there. But we found a way where we could steal a layer from TCP and apply it to UDP, and that layer is called automatic repeat request. So that if for some reason a frame of packets gets to the decoder on the receive side and it's missing a few packets of data, the decoder has the ability to tell the encoder on the other side, hey, could you retransmit number 1, 3, 7, and 12? And it can do that, create a little bit of a dynamic buffer, heal up the audio, send it through to the decoder, and you can't even tell that there's that happening. So there's a lot of little techniques that, we've given funny little marketing names to. But I would say one of the things that my company specifically excels at is making a marginal data network usable. As long as there's not 100% packet loss due to backhoe fade or just lack of internet or overuse, there's always a way to get data through. And as Barry was mentioning, I mean, all of us are broadcasters, and all of us have been in that situation where you're faced with having no avails in your schedule and not wanting to have to deal with make goods, especially when you don't have avails for it. And when your spots are anywhere from $500 to $1,200 a spot, missing a stop set is really not something that you want to have to deal with, from your general manager or your national sales manager, because it's money. I mean, a lot of us are in this because we're broadcasting to make revenue. And if we can't get the spots on, that's a problem. And also, there are stations that are primary entry points for IPAWS and common learning protocol, and you've got to have 100% uptime, which is why when he was talking about WLS, they've got 5 paths. It's not just a main and a backup. They've got a 950 STL. They've got maybe they've got an equalized line in there somewhere. I'm still surprised that I go into stations around the country and I find equalize. And I actually, that my very first radio job, that's how we transmitted. I broadcast the Sunday worship services from my church on an equalized phone line to WPON in Pontiac, Michigan, using a RCA DX44 microphone and a Bogan amplifier. That was pretty heady stuff back then. But yeah, I mean, as long as you've got a path, why not have 2 or 3 paths just to make sure it's going to work? What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some of our little tools that we've got in our toolbox. And many of you are maybe familiar with these because you may have deployed these, or maybe you just use something like our BrickLink codec and just wire it up and let it go to town without adding some of the feature set that's in the product. But I will share this little slide deck with you, and hopefully y'all can see that. Are we good there, Barry?
Yeah, we're seeing the there you go.
Okay. So this is just the connections page on our BrickLink and Access codec. It's all pretty much the same as you're looking at these. And one of the things you'll notice in the lower right-hand corner is something called switchboard. And there's a lot of confusion between switchboard and crosslock and what they do, but it's really quite simple. I refer to switchboard as instant messenger for your audio codec. The idea being that once the device connects to the internet, it automatically by default will talk to our switchboard server, which just lives somewhere out in the cloud. I can't say where because it's double top secret. It's a tier 3 highly secure facility. But it's sitting there with your account, and within your account, your devices are in there and recognized by their media access control address. So once the device reports in, it goes, oh, I know you. This is your MAC address. I can tell that this is your current level of firmware, and this is what you can do. And by the way, here's everybody else in your group, and here's where they're at. And they're actually presented as a little green cog, a little green flower, if you will, showing that they're online and available to connect. So switchboards are really kind of like a handshake server. So AOL Instant Messenger for your codec. So you see it, you select it, you connect it, and they'll talk to each other. Once you have that selected, you have the ability to add crosslock. Well, let me go back a little bit. Crosslock is something else. So switchboard is the handshake server. Crosslock is our secret sauce. It's the way that we make our connections more reliable by applying a bunch of very sophisticated algorithms to make the transport of audio more reliable. It's basically a virtual private network that is created between the two codecs. So you have the internet layer, and then within the internet layer, you have a crosslock layer, and it's within that crosslock layer that all the magic happens. So with crosslock, you have the reliability. With switchboard, you have the handshake. It just makes it easier. We kind of refer to it as having an IT professional on site without having to have them on site, because it's really designed to make sure that the device can poke a hole through the NAT or the firewall as long as all the ports aren't blocked down. And once the devices see each other, switchboard can actually make the crosslock connection happen automatically. In order for crosslock to happen, as I mentioned before, each device has to know the MAC address of each device. They have to know that they're capable of doing crosslock. And then once that happens, it creates that VPN between the two devices. All the magic happens within that VPN. So the very first thing that crosslock will do is it will identify both units by their MAC address, and then any other NIC, any other network interface controller on the network. So maybe you've got a 4G device, maybe you've got a wired broadband, maybe you've got a Wi-Fi. It will assign an IPv6 address to each one of those devices on either side, and it'll start measuring how much bandwidth is available on each of those. In the meantime, it's basically setting up media streams and status information between both codecs and keeping a live channel through NATs and firewalls. So there's a lot of stuff going on within crosslock and initiated by switchboard. So crosslock has something that's called an adaptive management engine that's basically doing all this heavy lifting that we've talked about. It's looking at each of those network interfaces. It is trying to find out if there's any predictable packet loss, and it will measure it in increments of about 5 minutes in a 5-minute window. And it's a predictive algorithm, so it can tell if it starts to see jitter or delay or patterns in traffic that would indicate that the network might not be stable. It can actually start to load balance between media devices. In this way, you're actually able to make that connectivity a little bit more reliable, because if one of those networks gets a little wonky, it'll actually just load balance it to the other one, even to the point where it can quarantine everything quarantine that underperforming network and balance it over to another one. Crosslock actually has a couple of different modes when it comes to handling data. There's the bonding mode or the aggregation mode, where it can actually take both networks and turn them into a larger pipe. And it can split the data between them, load balance as necessary. But basically, it's aggregating those networks and sending them across both networks. And it could be an AT&T 4G, it could be a T-Mobile 4G LTE, it could be a Wi-Fi, it could be an Ethernet. So you could actually have 5, 6, 7, 8 devices per end, and it's going to aggregate all of those devices and use the most usable ones for the best reliability possible. The other mode would be redundancy, where it just sends exactly 50% of the data about down both sides. Now, the thing that makes Crosslock interesting, in my opinion, is that you don't necessarily have to have multiple data networks on either side for Crosslock to work. You don't even have to have 2 networks on either side. You can have just one network on either side. It's still going to use that adaptive management engine to make sure that that one network will perform as efficiently as possible. An example I can give, I had been called by Georgia Public Radio because they had a bunch of our access codecs at their facility, and from Atlanta, they actually feed 13 different transmitters. And they have a Saturday afternoon matinee with the Metropolitan Opera, I think, that they rebroadcast to all of their 13 affiliates. And it seemed like they were getting this little blurble of audio every 30 seconds. And some of the old ladies that write checks to Georgia Public Broadcasting were getting really upset, and they were threatening not to send their checks in. So they called me, so I went out and took a look. We had just introduced the UDP reliability mode in our Bricklink and Access codecs, and I updated all the units. I engaged that algorithm, and as I mentioned before, if the decoder on the receive side senses that it's missing some packets and it's going to present some loss, it can tell the encoder to retransmit those packets, create a little dynamic buffer, and heal up the audio. I did that, and it magically healed everything up. After a little bit more investigation, we found out that they had multiple T1 segments between some of the cities, and the clocking was off on a few of the segments, which was just enough to create that little audio blurble. But UDP reliability was able to fix it. So Crosslock kind of worked its magic in that particular mode. As I mentioned, you don't have to have multiple networks, but multiple networks gives you a much better shot at actually providing the most reliable means of getting the audio data through from point to point. We originally developed Crosslock VPN for our video product. And if you think about it, video, HD video specifically over IP, requires probably a minimum of 4 megabits per second, maybe up to 8 megabits per second to get a decent HD picture at some 720p or 1080i. For audio, you're dealing with maybe 128 kilobits. And that's even a lot of data to use, because with an algorithm like HEAAC, or it's also known as AAC plus, 96 kilobits is more than enough to get a really high quality audio signal compressed and sent across the network. And it's still going to be 20 hertz to 22 kilohertz. And, radio kind of chops off at 15 kilohertz anyway, so it's going to sound really good. It just seems like it's overkill to use Crosslock for this, but just the idea of having that kind of reliability for such a small data payload is kind of an overwhelming tool to have. One of the other things that we developed mainly because a lot of people decided that Bricklink was a really good primary STL. Even if you have a wired network or even 2 wired networks, it does happen. Charles Kinney here in Atlanta had somebody digging up around his transmitter, and they ripped through all of his fiber and took him off the air. for a day. Mary, am I right about that? You know Charles, right? That happened, I want to say 8 months ago. It was a very bad day for Charles. He was out there at the transmitter over at Eagles Landing for 2 days, I think. Um, one of the things that could help in that instance is a feature that we developed that works hand in hand with Crosslock called Hot Swap. In this way, you can use one of our Connect modems, our Comrex Connect modems, plug it into the USB in the back of a BrickLink, and set it up so that it's not active. It's active in kind of a passive way. That's a stupid thing to say. It's kind of sitting in the background, just spitting like 16 kilobits worth of data, just a very small amount, just to say I'm alive. If the Crosslock adaptive management engine senses that there's enough packet loss to indicate that it's going to go off the air, it will actually fire up the Connect modem into full-time mode and basically send everything over that. So it basically just wakes it up and sends it over there. So you don't hear any loss. So Crosslock is managing this backup network just in case. Now, you don't necessarily have to use one of those modems. You could also use an Ethernet port, because on the back of the BrickLink, there is a USB to Ethernet adapter you could plug in. And you could use something like I don't know if my camera's on, but I've got this PepLink BR1 Mini, which is a dual SIM single radio device, which will allow for a SIM failover. But it's got a 3-port router built into it. And PepLink is a company out of Singapore that makes a lot of really great devices. And I actually stole their little slogan, unbreakable connectivity, for my talk, because that's basically what they're providing with their devices. They use something similar to our Crosslock. They call it SpeedFusion Connect. But with these devices, because they have some that are dual radio, quad SIM, dual SIM, single radio, that will work very nicely with our devices to provide an extra level of protection. But Hot Swap is a nice feature that would have helped out Charles in his instance if somebody decided to cut through his fiber, or if a main line goes down because somebody forgot to pay the cable bill. One of the things that Barry and I were talking about yesterday, and Barry had mentioned earlier in the talk, is well, what if I have a computer that I need to reboot out of the site, or what if I need to switch an audio feed remotely and I can't do it through my remote control? Well, BrickLink actually has, just like all of our IP codecs going back to I want to say back to the hotline back in the late 90s. It has a little mini 9-pin DIN on the back, which a lot of people hate, but it is what it is. So it's basically 4 contact closures in, 4 contact closures out. And we actually have a cable that goes 9-pin DIN to a DB9 connector. And you can wire that to a solenoid or to a switch to basically restart a computer or have it power cycle something, or connect to a CircuitWorks device to switch an audio feed. And within our firmware, within the actual GUI of our BrickLink and Access codecs, there are actually buttons that will actuate the contact closure outputs on the BrickLink. So you go into the GUI, you could fire off contact. Oops, I tried to push it. I forgot it was actually a slide. I was thinking it was actually, it looks so real. I thought it was the actual interface. But if you hit that button, it'll actuate basically pin 1 to pin 9.
Chris, Chris,
yeah.
Here.
Yes, sir.
How about this one right here?
Oh, yeah. Here, let's fire off that contact closure.
And I will do that for you right now.
Boom, there you go. And so basically it shorts pin 1 to pin 9, or pin 2 to pin 9, pin 3, pin 4 to pin 9. And then on the receive side, if you're receiving a contact closure, those will light up when pin 5 to pin 9, pin 6 to pin 9, pin 7, pin 8. There you go. But it's a nice little thing to have built in. I would say most of our box products have some kind of contact closure set up on it, including our Opal. And I have my Opal set up so that when a connection comes in, it will light up my Yellowtech lit lights so I can see that somebody's calling in to do a demo.
I got to
Oh,
admit to being feeling kind of dumb. I mean, I sat there, stared at it where it said contact closures, and never really internalized that until recently.
just noticed, hi, David Bialik. Says the BrickLink allows you to have a backup connection with the USB NIC. That's right. That's the hot swap thing we were talking about. Mary was showing another product similar to the PepLink Bond 6 bonding network router. Yeah, and there's Cradlepoint, and there's a bunch of stuff like that. And Stony Owen says he uses a contact closure 4 as a fail-safe interlock for the transmitter. Yeah, so it's a nice little feature set to have built in there. And there's also a serial data connection in there, so you could feed telemetry or any kind of RS-232 or RS-232 to 485 kind of control if you needed to.
Is there something else you'd
Okay.
like me to pop up here to?
Oh, no, I think that's perfect. Just wanted to show that screen. It's just one of those things that we were able to do when we had gotten away from Flash and updated to HTML5. We were able to bring a lot more of the feature set of our Access and BrickLink codecs into the GUI so they could be more meaningfully used remotely. Let's see.
I will let go of this and you can bring your slide back up.
Well, that's really all the stuff I wanted to talk about other than types of connectivity. I know you mentioned satellite. I had a question from a customer the other day about Starlink and if it could be used for a main STL. And my answer was, well, it could. I don't know if I'd want to do it personally. I mean, Starlink, the last I had talked to somebody that was using it, it was indicated that streaming media for professional broadcast was considered experimental. They now have something called a priority service, which to me sounded like they're hinting at a service level agreement without actually having a service level agreement. But you pay more money and supposedly they give you a higher priority on the network. But considering, they're still putting up 60 satellites a month. There was an instance recently where 9 of them got into a ion destabilized area of the atmosphere and they deorbited and burnt up in the atmosphere. And if that won't put a hole in your audio, I don't know what will. I know that they have the ability, it's a mesh network and they can do all kinds of neat tricks with it and refocus and rebeam. Starlink, I would think would be a good backup. I don't know if I'd use it as a main. I'd always want to use a wired service and I'd use one that is commensurate with the value of my spot load. I mean, if I can afford a really good high speed fiber, I'm going to do that. If the only thing that's available out there is DSL, I mean, there's so many options in terms of satellite services and wired services and wireless services. Barry had mentioned, using Ubiquiti 2.4, 5 gig services, 9 gig bass band. There's all kinds of radios you can use from MikroTik, Ingenious, Transio, Transgo, Motorola, point-to-point links, where you have a dedicated link between them. Microwave is also a possibility. But internet can be utilized a number of different ways, whether it's on a private network or the public internet. I would just say that finding a codec that has the right tools in the toolbox, that secret sauce to basically manage multiple data networks, or utilizing something like a PepLink router or a Cradlepoint router or the thing that Mary had mentioned, which it's called a Bond 6. There are all kinds of bonding routers that are available out there. it's a good idea to have as a backup. The internet's the internet. There's no secret sauce. There's no special top secret network other than maybe getting a static SIM that will give you a private APN into uh, Verizon or AT&T or T-Mobile. Those are like $500 and you own the IP address on that SIM. There's a lot of things you can do to make sure you have connectivity out there. I have to tell you, one of the most frightening phone calls I got was right after we introduced the access rack in 2006. And there was an engineer in West Texas. We designed this thing as a contribution tool, for someone going out doing a remote, you think a 3-hour remote, no big deal. We didn't think about it as a 24-hour duty cycle device. And the unit would basically have buffer overloads and reset after 24 hours. And it freaked out the guy who had decided to use it as an STL. When we found out that he needed to use it as an STL, we had to go back and do some work on it. But he was using, at the time, HughesNet as his backhaul because apparently it was like $200 a month for all you could eat for the little bit of data that he needed. And that's the only thing he could get out of his transmitter out in the hinterlands of West Texas. So a low cost, 1 meter dish and point it up at the 45-degree slope and off you go. But KU band and VSAT, I know a lot of people using VSAT as their STL because it's the only thing they can get out there, and still very low cost. And there are a lot of companies that specialize in deploying these for broadcast. I'm going to stop talking now because I feel like I've been rambling.
No, you're doing fine. Appreciate that. I'm going to bring this thing back up here again, mainly because I'd like to ask you a question or two myself as to this is a Bricklink 2, and certainly you have Bricklink 3 and some more features, but can you kind of tell us what we're looking at here?
I think it's a screen from a Bricklink 2.
It is.
Oh, you mean what's it doing? Yeah, okay. So this is the performance screen, and the performance screen actually gives you a lot of information depending on what kind of connection you have. Obviously, it's the transmit receive rate if you have any packet loss, frame loss, overhead. The screen on the left-hand side is really the jitter versus delay, and then the target delay is that orange line. So right now it's just cooking along at a very low 23 milliseconds of encode delay. So that's pretty good. On the right-hand side, that's showing any, and this is on the receive. We're looking at the receive right now. It's showing any packet loss or frame loss on the receive, which there is none. And that's what you want to see. You don't want to see any blotchy red lines. You don't want to see solid red lines going from 0 to 100% because that's just like 100% packet loss, frame loss. Every once in a while, you might see a little blip down on the right-hand side and then a little blue line over it. That just means that there was a little bit of a packet loss and that the device was actually applying a correction to it so it wouldn't be heard. And that's one of the things within our little adaptive management engine that you'll see that, yeah, there's a little blue line, a little blip up there, just a little tiny bit of data loss, like maybe 1%, but not enough to be noticeable. But if it did pop up a little bit more, you'd see a blue line up there. And if you scroll down a little bit, Barry, if you don't mind. So there's the codec channel, which would actually show you the transmit receive rates for each side. So one side is receiving, the other one is not transmitting. It's just sending a little bit of data. Crosslock, do you have crosslock enabled?
No.
Okay. If you did have crosslock enabled, it would show you some stats within crosslock. And then there are some settings within crosslock with little handles on there where you can actually manually go in there and adjust the encode or the latency on the device. So if it had ramped up to accommodate for some perceived packet loss or predicted packet loss, you could grab the little handle and just ramp the latency down if you wanted to. So it's a really good, useful information window for seeing what's going on with the data on your network.
This is for a little Native American LPFM, so it's kind of running barefoot, and it's been very reliable.
And it looks like you're running FLAC
Yes,
on there. Yeah. Because I think 723, so it's like 648 kilobits for mono, FLAC mono. Yeah. And FLAC is a lossless coding algorithm, and it looks like it's performing very, very well on that network. So I'd be really happy with that.
they have been, and don't call me that often at all.
Sweet. If you could just click on the profile manager, and this is kind of the guts of one of our codecs. If you could just go to let's say go to the AAC stereo, HEAAC stereo, down below. Yeah, there we go. And if you click on the show advanced and open that up, and then click on local settings. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff in there that we recommend that people don't touch, but it that's why we kind of hide that for the most part. But there's a lot of things that you can do when you create a profile. And the profile is the thing that is basically telling the codecs what's going to happen. So you create a profile, you assign it to a connection. When the connection is made, it's going to tell the local encoder, I want you to use the stereo 64 kilobit HEAC. Loss cushion is going to be 5%. This is going to be the window that we're going to be looking at. There's a delay limit of 200 or 2000 milliseconds or 2 seconds. And you can change that if you need to. And then there are some other little things like you can add frames per packet if for some reason you're dealing with a particularly contentious and marginal network, just to ensure that information's getting through to the decoder. A lot of that stuff is very, very tweaky, but very, very useful. You can also have crosslock manage the delay on the codec, so you're not basically having the profile do it. Crosslock is the adaptive management engine is going to kick in and handle it all. If you scroll down just a little bit, Barry, there we go. Yeah, so there are two little features that are not engaged in this particular coding algorithm by default, and that's congestion avoidance and UDP reliability, which if you have a crosslock connection happening, those things are being managed by crosslock. But if you're not using crosslock, we might tell you if you're having some packet loss or some frame loss or just a little bit of weirdness in your connection, go ahead and enable those, and that's going to make sure that your data transmission gets through. But that's kind of like the headache window. You try and stay out of that as much as you can. 9 times out of 10, one of the default profiles is going to work for you. But if you start having, well, I'll give you an example. A buddy of mine who I unfortunately lost recently had done a nationally syndicated country radio show, and we would send it up to Cumulus Media Networks in New York. And he had a brick link that he was using to get the audio up there. And it was dropping out like every 15, 16 seconds during the show. After the show, it was fine. Well, I come to find out that he had a T1 in there, but that T1 also was shared with all of his incoming phone lines. So whenever anybody called in, it was causing some packet loss. So I had to go in there, create a little bit of a buffer, a little bit of a delay cushion. I think I did 500 milliseconds or 600 milliseconds, and that seemed to accommodate for that packet contention with the phone lines coming in. And it saved the day. Luckily, he knew somebody that worked for Comrex.
Very nice. Does anyone have any questions for Chris? Any comments about the Bricklink or really anything from Comrex? But he's got the tips and tricks here.
Hey,
A lot of
Chris,
the stuff I just
Ed Schwartz, how you doing?
hey Ed, good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, well, I retired out from XM, so that's why you don't hear of me anymore. Just anyway, one of the things that we always looked at in the diagnostics was that the data goes and the data scrolls and the data is never seen again. Has there ever been any thought to trying to capture that or offload it? Because more times than not, at a 9 o'clock meeting, somebody will say, "Well, you know, at 6:30 this morning, host whatever out in the hinterlands had a 20-second dropout, and of course the data is gone." And we always say, "Well, why didn't you call when it was happening?" But never mind that. Has there ever been any thought to coming up with a way to be able to offload any of these diagnostics and kind of line them up with times so you can go back and look at them later, and then throw the data away 2 hours later or 6 hours later or whatever?
So this is when I have to start thinking like Tom Hartnett, and I have to answer like him because he's our technical director, and I actually have learned to think like Tom, which is really kind of scary. I will tell you this: that exists. There is a diagnostic mode within a profile. So if you're using a profile, you can tell it to basically download the data file for that particular transmission. So it'll only do it for as long. So you create a profile, you tell it to capture data, you assign it to a connection, you hit connect, and it'll start logging that data. When you're done, it'll basically take all that data and put it on a file inside the device, and then you can go and grab it, or we can grab it and take a look at it. The data as it exists is not really, I would say, it's not. It has to go through a special tool that one of our senior software engineers will look at and go, "Oh, this is what happened." It's a project to try to make that customer viewable. And I know that at one point we were going to try and make some of that happen in the Fleet Commander software that we have. And to some degree, there is some data logging in there. It's more connection logging. But it's so much data that it could basically chew up all the NAND in the device. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've kind of struggled with how do we handle the logging. Do we kind of export that to something like Fleet Commander? And how do we make that happen? So it's definitely on the whiteboard. I would say somewhere between here, and here, it's on the whiteboard. So to answer your question, it's on the whiteboard. It's doable. It's just a big project, and trying to figure out a way to make it customer friendly is always been the challenge, because it's a lot of really obscure data.
Yeah, I'll just make this other comment. So back from my XM days, of course, XM used the Comrex Bricklinks, all the Comrex products on pretty much an industrial basis, and there isn't any connection mode, a thing that Chris was just talking about in his slide thing that we haven't used. Hosts that didn't have reliable internet, having a redundant air link, things like that. It's when Crosslock finally came in, it resolved a lot of issues. But as I reminded program directors in those days, well, we can monitor our end of the thing, we can look at the host end, but I said there's a lot of internet in the middle that I said we have absolutely no visibility into what goes on, which is why I also harken back to the days when we had ISDN, and you could put that up for weeks and it would just stay there. But of course, those days have long since gone. Thanks, Chris.
Good to see you, Ed.
Good. Thanks, Ed, for stopping by. Just watch out for that monolith, you know.
Yeah, you recognized it. Very good.
I do.
Yeah, Hal is in the background watching you, I'm pretty sure.
Mark, I see you unmuted yourself. Something on your mind?
Well, I was just going to comment about, it's been a long time now, when the Bricklinks were new, I set up a little system with 3 Bricklinks and 3 stations, or 6 Bricklinks and 3 stations. And in a round robin fashion, station 1 was morning, 2 was mids, and 3 was afternoons. And we sent closures over that to trigger commercials at the 2 receiving stations. And it all just worked for over a year. It was like, set it up, turn it on, let it go. And, just said no. The only time it failed was when a car hit a phone pole and took down the internet at one station. That's not Bricklink's fault.
Yeah, that's one of those things.
Go ahead.
To kind of remind people that we can't make internet appear if it's not there.
Yeah.
You know,
but it really worked real well, and we were used to feeding the contacts in and out of the automation system at the 2 receiving stations. And after the first day or two, a few little glitches, and then it just went. So I still use Bricklinks just to move audio around for a broadcast we do now with the church, and that works. I probably need to update all the firmware stuff, but it just works.
Yeah, we're on 4.6P2.
I probably won something. It hadn't been updated since it was put in.
That might require a stepped upgrade. Yeah.
That reminds me of a feature that you didn't mention, and that is that we discovered that one Comrex could feed 2 different receive sites.
Yeah. So, and I had this conversation with my dealer in the UK today. A lot of people don't realize how versatile our codecs are, because it's not just a point-to-point thing. It can do multi-streaming. So you could actually feed from one device to as many as 170 devices if you have enough bandwidth on your transmission side. And it can go to different connections. And I've got people that will use them, like an access rack to 7 different transmitter and translators. It's feeding the same audio to all those locations. But you're able to create multiple instances of the encoder and send it to different IP addresses. Likewise, you can use, not likewise, but also you can use it in IP multicast. IP multicast does have some specific IT requirements. Specifically, it has to be on a private network that has IGMP routers at all the egress and ingress points. But one device can generate an IP multicast message, and it can go out to as many as a gajillion different devices. I don't know I think that's the theoretical number, but an example would be recently we supplied 80 of these to Sound Transit in Seattle, and they're being used for the Sound Transit project for trackside announcements. They have their master control area, and somebody will make an announcement that basically the mic feeds into a Bricklink at the control center, and then that IP multicast message goes to all of the other stations and platforms in the system to make the announcement. And one of those actually feeds a recorder, because for ADA compliance, they actually have to record and have a electronic record of all messages that are distributed on the network.
Interesting. Mr. Moats.
I just wanted to thank Christopher for painting a picture of like 3/4 of my customers. Can y'all hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Just checking. I've got so many of those PepLink devices at various sites that I've lost count. The entire UMass network has Balance 20X at their transmitter site at each one of them. 3 of those sites cannot get any kind of terrestrial service because they're so far up a hill or out in the woods that the only thing I can get is Verizon Wireless. So the university has a deal with Verizon to have static IP addresses on all those SIM cards, and it works killer at 64 kilobits AAC plus HE. It's amazing how good and how reliable it sounds. The only 2 sites that I'm not doing with that are the 2 sites that are co-channel with my main transmitter. So I've got another company's composite over the internet devices for those 2 sites to keep them perfectly lined up and everything. But in addition to that, I have a whole bunch of commercial customers that have similar problems, and they had such a difficult time of it that they asked me if since I was providing backup internet service at 2 different sites for them when their internet service wouldn't work and they couldn't get anything better, they said, well, why don't you just supply us with internet and add it to your bill? So I called up Verizon and paid that $500 fee, and now Loud and Clean has static IP addresses on its SIM cards, and I've got them all over the place. And the brick links, just with UDP reliability turned on, they're phenomenally stable. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Grady. Thanks for being a great customer and a great supporter. One thing that I will say, I really like the PepLink stuff. That's why we're now a PepLink reseller. We're going to be adding some of these to our product offerings. One of the devices that we kind of like, that it's kind of a secret, it's more of an accessory for them. It's called the Max Adapter. And it's basically a single radio. It has a Sierra wireless modem in it. It also has GPS capabilities on it as well. And you can use an app that they have called In Control 2 to see where your devices are based on the GPS coordinates that this thing spits out. But because it's got dual SIMs on it, you can use, it's basically a USB device. So it can be powered off of the 5-volt USB on an Access or a BrickLink. And it has the dual SIMs. And if one of those SIMs gets wonky, you can have it set up so it'll fail over automatically to the other one. Now, it's not an instantaneous failover. It's kind of a slow failover, however long it takes for it to recognize the device, get an IP address, and then connect to the network. But it does give you a little bit more redundancy. We're going to be moving, we have our Comrex Connect modems, which are these things here. Unfortunately, we can't make these anymore because Sierra Wireless has obsoleted the modem we were using. But these guys have more current ones. And theirs are, I think, a little bit cuter than ours. So we're actually going to be switching over to these. And they're nice. And we're working on a little mounting bracket for it. So I highly recommend the PepLink stuff. They're based in Singapore. It's a very engineering-driven company. And the Balance 20 that Grady mentioned is kind of an industrial device. A lot of fire trucks and fleet vehicles actually use these. And a lot of these devices support band 14, which is the FirstNet band. So those of you who are, because of a primary entry point status, maybe have access to FirstNet, using one of these devices with band 14 just gives you that much more of an advantage when you're using it for things like your STL. I love toys also.
Quickly, I'll just say this. The main reason I went with the 20X is because at my small sites, it reduces my equipment count and my power supply count because it's got a 4-port local area network switch built right into it. So there's less to go wrong.
And if I'm not mistaken, it has the ability to aggregate Wi-Fi, a broadband connection or an Ethernet connection, and it's a dual radio quad SIM.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I don't have a dual SIM in any of them, but it's real nice to know that all I'd have to do is, call up a competitor and stick a SIM from another company in there, and then I'd have true dual path with no wires.
And PepLink has, as I'd mentioned, something similar to what we do. Our crosslock is a VPN between our devices. Their VPN is called Speed Fusion Connect, and it does kind of the same thing. They have something called WAN smoothing, and they do some aggregation between their SIMs as well. But just with all the technology that's out there, it just makes sense, especially the low cost of some of these things. This box is like $250. Grady, how much is that the Balance 20X? Do you recall?
Yeah, it's $400, but well, it may be $450 now. You can just buy it on Amazon. The box is actually less than that, but they make you buy 1 year of their central management program, and then you don't have to renew it. I'm not using their central management system at all, even though I've got so many of these devices.
And that, you know, the fact that it's got GPS on it makes it somewhat interesting. Not necessarily applicable for broadcast, but it's nice to know, you know, where one of your radios is if you need to find it.
Exactly.
But it was designed primarily for fleet applications so that you could follow your UPS truck around and see when your package is going to show up. And like I said, I love toys. I mean, these are cool things. Barry, are you napping?
No, I'm right here listening carefully.
Oh, okay.
All as you're saying. Any
There-
other questions from the floor here?
One other thing, there is a gotcha with Verizon anyway. Once you make the deal with them to have static IP addresses on the devices on your account, static IP addresses are assigned by Verizon in regions. So I have stations in Connecticut and stations in Florida and stations in Michigan. So if I put one of my internet systems at one of those stations that's not in New England, I have to kind of pay extra close attention when I'm ordering it to make sure the salespeople know where it's going to be. And I can't move it all the way across the country. And I can't test one for Florida in my shop here in Massachusetts.
Yeah, I think the SIM has to be tied to a specific geographic APN in that region. And that's, I mean, it's nice that you have a private APN. It doesn't really give you, I think they're still operating like 5 megahertz slices off of their towers, but I guess just having a static IP and a private APN gives you a little bit more reliability than just using their you know, public internet APN.
Excellent. Chris, we've had you here for a little over an hour, and I sure appreciate the time. If there's anything you wanted to add or any stray questions, we'll not chase you away, but we sure do thank you for coming.
It is absolutely my pleasure. I mean, I'm a remote broadcast guy from way back, so I'm always looking for interesting solutions to help customers and actually help friends do their own remotes. That's why I've got a rack full of Ubiquiti M5 and M2 bullets over there that I have used for various stuff, and little PoE injectors that operate off of Anton Bauer batteries and all kinds of fun, goofy little toys.
Do you find a lot of interference there?
With which?
The 5 and the 2.4?
I actually used the M5 bullet at Oshkosh for the EAA Air Show, mainly because I knew I wasn't going to be able to use cell service out there because it's like 600,000 people show up for that event, and it's on an active airfield. And it actually worked perfectly until one of the AWACS planes came in and they did something that turned everything off, just like boom, off. It's like, uh-oh. Okay. Only happened once though. But I like the Ubiquiti stuff as long as your line of sight, it's very tasty. I mean, I got a mile away from, and I was using it on our video codec, and I was able to get a mile away from the truck. And as long as you're within, I had a nano bridge on top of it. And as long as you're within a 60-degree beam, it's pretty good stuff.
Yeah, I've heard good word about those. Haven't used one myself, although I had an opportunity very close, but they didn't want to have a war with their IT department. Okay.
Ubiquiti used to make 900 megahertz product, and I have several of those old Mosley LandLink boxes that the electronics that they were packing in with their filter box would not work reliably. And I've actually successfully replaced the LandLink electronics with the Ubiquiti 900 megahertz boxes, and they really do work great.
Got to use what you got. Why not?
Barry, I'm talking to you right now over Ubiquiti Link. My daughter across the street is where I get my internet. She subscribes to, can't think of the name of the outfit. It's the big one around. Anyway, I've got a Ubiquiti, their little small nano that is a distance of about 300 feet, I think it is, from my antenna to the one over there. That never has failed. Well, it did fail once. I had to replace it. Power supply failed, but it's been great.
Good.
I concur on the power supplies. Those things don't seem to last very long. You can't really put them in service for a long time before they fail. I've got two bad ones in a box over in the corner.
Oh, that's right. Come to think of it, my sister, who lives over in Arizona, not too far from Barry, I sent her one to use to her neighbors to get his internet into her house. And her power supply failed, but simple replacement of the power supply got her back in business again.
Very good. Very good. Say, before I forget, Ron Castro, you still with us here? I don't know if I can see. No, I guess.
Doesn't look like he's still here.
No, looks like he popped out. Oh, unless he's listening on YouTube. We got a whole bunch on YouTube. Ron had a question about replacing towers, what a tower might cost, but we'll have to get that to him elsewise.
Well, Barry, thanks for the invite. I appreciate you letting me be here today.
You bet. Hope to have you come back again for some more material. I know you got that gaggle thing going, and of course access, and we'll have another opportunity, I'm sure.
Well, whenever you need me to fill in, I'm happy to come and blather away.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks, Grace, for us too.
We'll do it.